Welcome to another episode of Leadership Talks by Advertising Vietnam and Precious Communications. I'm your host, Lars Födisch, and today we will look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of AI in the advertising ecosystem. And we are very delighted to have our guest today from DoubleVerify, Corinna. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Lars. Hi, everybody. I'm Corinna from DoubleVerify.
Let's look at a few mega trends. There's the saying, you can't manage what you can't measure. And one of the key trends that we're seeing is everybody wants everything at scale, at real time, and across so many platforms. How can we stay ahead of that and don't get too confused and lost?
I think that you touch a pretty good point regarding basically, with the explosion of data that we're seeing nowadays. Obviously, you can leverage on those data basically to get more insights, to know better your consumers, better your audience, how to target them. But at the same time, I feel like nowadays, a user is like on so many platforms, right? Like digital platforms. So you are on web, you are on different like type of apps, connected TV. So it's not only like the television, the only channel that can, reach out to a consumer. So I think like it's very important like to understand like the ecosystem and to know how to where to find your target audience and how to leverage the data in order to gain more insights and know more about their behavior and drive more, like I would say, personalized content and messages.
Everybody talks about personalization, but how do you balance targeting and relevance?
I think that's very important point as well, because like nowadays we are bombarded with so many ads, right? I think you're seeing probably some people say maybe more than 4,000, 10,000 ads per day. So imagine the amount of content that you are seeing. If a brand will reach out to you, in a personalized way, you will feel like more, the ad is less like intrusive, right? Like let's say, for example, if you are searching for water filter, right? If you are receiving ads about like clothes or different like products, you might not be interested. But if you receive like a water filter, you might be more interested. So how I believe like it's the question is like how you can leverage the data in a way that you respect the privacy of the user, but at the same time like knowing his preferences, like in order to deliver the right message and product.
So there's a lot of talking about AI can help us. So is it, in your opinion, is it our friend or our foe?
I mean, like after our we just released actually a Global Insight report recently, and we have asked like marketers, right, like in the industry, what they think about AI, and we have seen that 60% of marketers, they believe that AI is bad, while also 60% they believe that AI is good, right? So basically, what we have seen is like, okay, there are like two sides of AI, right? Like bad AI that we call, basically, I would say in this context should be like the AI that using like unethical, way of like reaching to consumer. For example, the generative AI can create like a lot of content, a lot of like deepfakes, misinformations, fake news, And we are in this year is the year of elections, like so many countries are in elections. Another thing that we have seen that there are a lot of like, it's called like MFA sites, so made for advertising websites, basically made only like for the advertiser to gain money. And last and not least, it can also like create a lot of like fraud. Mm-hmm. Right, like with the rise in chatbot or like bot fraud, those kind of things. So generative AI is able like to create more like complex like scheme of ad frauds, create like fake impressions. It can also like help to basically like mimic like human behavior and so on.
So how do you then make sure that you still detect what it is? It's always like this little race on who is ahead in there. But as you said, advertisers want to know where their money goes to the right person, no fakes, and how do you make sure that's detected if it's a human or a fake?
I would say that if you heard about like expression fight fire with fire, so basically while the AI is helping fraudster like to improve their like fraud schemes, we're also using AI in order like to detect, all those fraud schemes. So Double Verify, for example, we've been using AI for more than a decade. And basically, we are using one of the area that we are using is to detect fraud. So AI is able to analyze a big amount of data, and is able to detect like variants that like a human being won't be able like to detect.
Do you think there's a big difference on the channels? You talked about connected TVs. There's a typical digital advertising. There's mobile. Does it differentiate? Does the fraud rate differ on different channels?
Yeah, we have seen actually an increase of around, I would say like 34% in ad fraud on mobile. And I would say that where the money goes, as I say, the fraudster would also go. Like we have seen also increase in CTV, basically connected TV platform. And we have seen also increase in the fraud rate in those platforms as well.
So you said attackers may use AI to mimic human behavior. So if I don't have a very sophisticated platform, do you know what are some of the things to look out for to know is it real or not?
Actually, it's like very difficult to detect because like before when we're detecting fraud, now AI is able like to mimic human behavior. So it's able like to, for example, bring more impressions or more like interactions on certain apps, certain times of the day. So basically mimic human behavior. You don't see the pattern like it's a robot, but it can, help basically to, so it's, I would say it's really hard to detect as a human. So that's why we are also using AI to detect. I would say like in terms of methodology, I think like Double Verify uses like deterministic methodology, and we are able to detect like the most variant, types of fraud and schemes. And we are able like to detect within like 8 minutes and also like block those kind of fraud.
Okay. Everybody who normally talks about AI just talks about the ChatGPTs of this world. But you're looking more on using AI for the analytics bit, right?
Actually, there's like, I would say that when we use AI, we need to, understand what kind of AI in which context you would use. While everybody would be more familiar with the generative AI, which is like ChatGPT, those kind of things. So generative AI, basically, it's an AI that can create and generate like content, right? Like based on what you feed it. While predictive AI, on the other side, it's more, it's able like to predict and to create, to forecast, it's based more on data, historical data, and those kind of things. So while you use like generative AI for more like, let's say, creative side, content production, those kind of things, we are using like predictive AI in order like to optimize the campaigns, because you'll put different type of data. Like for example, you want to optimize to a better outcome or ROAS, ROI, right? So you'll put like those kind of data, cost data into factors. So the AI is able like to predict and to, optimize the campaign in real time based on what you want to achieve.
Dealing with a lot of data is not new, so it's just exploding. How have you kept up with that increase of data volumes for your customers? Because AI is relatively young, no?
I would say that AI has been there for a while.
Okay. It
was just that, was not, I would say, accessible or, to more like a general public like audience. I think it started like moving and being more aware like when ChatGPT, became like famous. But I would say that in our company, we have been using AI for more than a decade. We have been using AI for example, in detecting fraud. We've been using AI in content classification. So, for example, we're able like to detect which content it's safe or unsafe for a brand, in which environment, right? So detection, basically, we are using several signals like metadata. We can analyze like context, keywords, audio, video. So all those kind of AI, we're able to,
So with AI being used also on the bad side and deepfakes coming up, how can marketers make sure that they don't lose general trust with customers? Because customers now always like, is it good or not? And the typical feeling, if it feels too good to be true, most likely it isn't, right?
Yeah, that's true, because unfortunately, if you don't know how to adopt and use AI correctly, it might mislead into, a perception that AI is not good, and, it might create, I would say, negative feelings and sentiments towards your consumers. For example, if your ad is shown in a website where they sell fake products or something like that, right? It might create a negative perception. I mean, as companies, they should embrace the transparency. So choose, for example, work with tech companies or providers in a transparent way, and embrace AI, but at the same time having also a human touch, right? Not trusting 100%.
Let's maybe move to a specific part for Vietnam. How do you see the advertising market in Vietnam transforming or moving?
I would say that Vietnam is one of the among top 3 faster growing country in Southeast Asia, and I feel people here are pretty open to new technology, also to adopt new trends. So I think with the rise of AI and education, basically your advertiser in Vietnam can leverage the power, of this tool to drive better engagement, better outcomes for the clients and for the.
Let's move beyond just AI and look at some of the major trends for advertising in Vietnam. What do you see are the big movements in the market that marketers should be aware of?
I would say that we see a growth in online streaming services. There are different type of targeting, smart targeting has been increased with the cookieless future, approaching. And what we have seen also in our global insight report is that some new channels has evolved, for example retail media networks. And when we talk about retail media networks, you think about, for example, a Lazada, Shopee, Grab, those channels, those platforms who own the first party data. So yeah, we've seen a growth in those kind of channels.
Let's look at a few of those that you just mentioned. So those retail media networks, how much are they willing to actually open their gates and let companies like you actually to look into how much is true, because they want to keep it as a secret sauce, no?
That's a very interesting point, indeed. I think the challenge for the advertiser nowadays is to own their own first-party data, right? But it's not that easy. So I think even though those retail media networks, those channels, they own their data, and they don't share detail with the advertiser. At the same time, you can leverage those data to deliver more personalized messages in case you don't have your own first party data. So I think that it's a win-win, because they can make use of their data in order to reach customers and to drive more I would say sales or more outcomes for the business.
Let's talk about, you started mentioning more streaming services, live streaming. How does it change the game for advertisers? Do they just have to pay longer because it just keeps going on? Or how do you make sure this is real and not just somebody put on a video and it keeps going?
I would say with the rise of online streaming services, we have seen increase of short video formats as well, right? Because the consumer span is very low. Advertisers, they're creating now shorter video and more impactful, and you need to get the attention of those of your consumer in that. So I would say that from what we have seen across across the world, and especially in Southeast Asia, now advertisers, they are looking at different metrics, for example attention metric, because they want to know where I can reach, which channel can I reach to my audience, and can I bring attention, drive attention to them. Yeah, I would say that it's evolving, the whole ecosystem is evolving, from the online media streaming to the with the short video, and also different type of metrics to measure different campaign effectiveness. Yeah.
The other thing you mentioned was smart targeting. What is that? Because we know cookieless future is discussed for many, many years. Apparently now it's coming for real, but they pushed it back so many times.
So I would say like smart targeting basically like how you target your consumer like outside of demographic, right? Like because before we are assuming that let's say I'm selling Harley Davidson, my target audience might be a male 40 plus with a high income who likes like who likes like probably adventure or something like this, right? You have like you create your target audience in mind. But what if Corina, a young working woman, also like likes to, like ride and would be, like interested in Harley Davidson? So it's more like on the consumer interest rather than demographic and what you assume that will target. As I mentioned earlier, like based, for example, on AI, you can, basically identify all those kind of like consumer behavior. You can see like patterns, like what you are interested on. So I think like, that would be more like contextual targeting, I would say, rather than demographic.
So maybe coming to an end, what do you think keeps you and your customers up at nights? Why should marketers still be worried these days, other than fraud in general?
A good TV show. No, I'm kidding. I would say that, like, as like a marketer and also, working in this industry, I believe that you need to be to understand your like consumer. In our case, like to understand our like clients. What are the future trends and to stay ahead of, like all the, I would say, evolvement and development of the new trends.
But hasn't that always been the case, or is it just getting so much harder because there's more competition, there are more channels, there are more, I don't know, you said like 5,000 ads we're getting bombarded with. What advice would you give marketers to not panic, and what are the easier steps to cut through the noise?
Yeah, I would say that, it's not the same. I mean, we've been always like, adopting, trying to be, innovative as much as we can and adopting new trends. I would say that AI nowadays is like just at the beginning. It's like the World Wide Web, like a few decades ago. First time when we had the computer and you're researching, you're like, wow, it's like different world. So I would say it's just like a beginning of the new area that we just need to learn to, to embrace it and learn like how you can learn this tool to make your, I would say, campaign more effective or make your work more, effective and reducing like manual work where you can. And instead of focusing on, let's say, optimizing or small like manual work, you can focus on other bigger things like, I don't know, more creative or, strategy, insights, those kind of things that you can leverage, AI to do other, I would say, boring tasks.
What we've seen in print in the past and also more now online is that businesses are at the risk that their content, their ads, their information is displayed in the wrong context. What kind of things have you and your clients seen here in Vietnam? How could that play out?
Yeah, we have seen like with the rise of digital advertising, right? There are also a lot of platforms that generate user-generated content that you might, might change. So you don't know, where your ad will be displayed. At the same time, like you don't want your ad to be displayed next to an offensive like content or pornography website or some like website that they are like promoting like fake products, counterfeit and those kind of things. Like using AI again and the technology, to detect different like content and context, like where your ad will be displayed is really important because that will basically help you to prevent, unsafe or unsuitable like content and, prevent it.
Have you seen any particular industries being more at risk than others?
I would say that in terms of like brand safety, there's like a floor, like nobody would like to advertise, they say, on copyright infringement or, like pornography, those kind of thing, or for example in Vietnam, like political sensitive topics. However, in terms of like suitability, it differs like from brand to brand, right? Like there are like some brands that are open to advertise to content related to parents and kids, for example. But there are certain brands, like alcohol brands, they will want to avoid this kind of content, right? So if you're a milk brand, you'd like to reach out to a mom or, like a parent. But if you are like selling beer or alcohol, then obviously this kind of like content you'd like to avoid. It's not a custom fit for one size fit for all, it's more like custom depending on your brand suitability preferences. I would say that there are some brands that are more, let's say, like alcohol or tobacco, because we are in Vietnam and, like these kind of categories that are more like sensitive. So it's more like sensitive to advertise, like, like for those brands. But I would say that, yeah, every brand will have like their own categories or...
One situation that a lot of marketers, especially in the digital space, are facing is that those big platforms like the TikToks, the Googles, the Metas, they change their algorithms every now and then. What can marketers do to be not too vulnerable to these changes affecting their campaigns?
I think it's, honestly, I think it's pretty hard like to predict. I think the important point is like to be on the top of it, to be able like to measure omnichannel, because you'll measure not only on those platforms and, you run ads on different other kind of platform like apps, website, and so on. So I think it would be good like to have a transparency and measurement in terms of, like the omni-channel, all the platform you have. And depending on that, you can also see which one like driving more outcome or, engagement for your like campaigns or like brands. And then you can allocate the budget or, strategy accordingly.
So we talked a lot about Vietnam, but a lot of marketers look at different markets. So your company is globally exposed. What do you see how Vietnam is standing compared, for example, to your neighbor countries in terms of fraud, and what can marketers do about it?
Actually, we've seen like interesting numbers in terms of like fraud rate in Vietnam. It's around, I would say, 0.4%, which is like lower than the benchmark. So the benchmark for the campaigns that are like not protected campaign would vary around like 1%, and for the unprotected, like the fraud scheme can be like from 1 to 22%, like the fraud rate. However, in Vietnam, we have seen like a lower number than the benchmark, and we have seen especially across the clients, global clients that we are working, and they have been applying, like protection since, we've been like working together. So I believe that this number also, it's a fact. It's like basically they are aware about this issue and they are like protecting their campaigns. Yeah.
What's one of the riskiest markets to do advertising right now?
I would say that would be also Vietnam. I would say, yeah, because we have seen, apps are booming, mobile gaming, different type of things. And I would say that, Vietnamese people are smart and creative. So a lot of like fraudulent, they will also like coming from Vietnam. But at the same time, we are like aware about, what's happening and will...
One last question, because a lot of people out there praise the power of machine learning for analytics. The challenge with analytics traditionally is always after the fact. So after I've done my campaign, I can see what worked or what didn't. How can we get ahead of that and say, before I spend the money, I already have a prediction of what might be better for my budgets or not?
Yeah, I think like with this, like you can use also like AI, predictive AI, basically what I have mentioned before. One of the advantage of using predictive AI is like you can, as the name says, you can predict, right? Like based on your KPIs or on your, different like business outcome that you want to put to predict and also optimize in real time. I think like nowadays, like most of the advertiser and most of our clients, they are not waiting until the campaign ends. They want like after maybe 2-3 days, to be able like to see the data in real time and optimize in real time. time is an important factor because everything's moving with a high speed. So precision, time, and adaptability.
This concludes today's episode of Leadership Talks, where we learned about the good, the bad, and the ugly of AI. And apparently, Corinna and I are predicted to buy Harley Davidsons. Let's see about that. Thank you so much for being on the show today with us.
Thank you for having me, Lars. Thank you, everybody.